Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I am Nick Chase from OpenStack Unlocked, and this is the OpenStack Unlocked podcast. Today we have with us my illustrious co-host, John Jainschigg, and the folks at Catbird. John, why don't you tell us who we have with us today?
Okay. We have with us today, who I have just met, Holland Barry, the CTO of Catbird, and Chris Tamblyn, who is Senior VP of Products and Business Development, with whom I have been interoperating for the past several weeks as Catbird has proceeded with an application validation with Mirantis OpenStack. Welcome, both of you. I'm very pleased to meet you, Holland, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. Obviously, security is enormously important in all areas of data center operations, particularly in OpenStack, since OpenStack's own security features are relatively rudimentary, security groups and so on. But a particular problem, obviously, is encountered by anyone trying to make clouds work in a cloud-native way, which is how do you secure constantly changing dynamic workloads on VMs and potentially in other sub-VM, e.g. container frameworks? How do you make sure that things do not start and stop in ways that expose them or conversely include them in security groups that they should not be members of? How do you police policy top down? How do you make all of these potentially complex operations involving potentially thousands of workloads auditable, and how do you prove compliance?
And if you can answer all of those in 5 words or less.
Yeah, really.
Just Catbird.
Please answer that in a non-technical way. But it really sounds, I mean, I'm really excited about Catbird because it sounds like you do have answers to all of those questions, and those are the things that keep data center operators and OpenStack gurus up at night. So tell us about Catbird.
Yeah. So the one-word answer to your question actually is Catbird for most of the things you brought up, but just at the high level, Catbird makes a software-defined security solution for hybrid IT infrastructure, and I'll talk about what we mean by hybrid IT. But in the case of OpenStack, we really got pulled into this environment to provide a layer of security in Fabric to address most, if not all, of what you just covered, right? So we really believe in the fact that we need to be measuring and applying security policy at the instance and VNIC level, right? So our smallest unit of measure is the UUID of the VNIC. We're very tenant aware. And just to drill in a little bit more to the exact functionality that's on the truck is, we have a full distributed IDS system. We have a way of orchestrating the native neutron security groups in OpenStack. We have a full vulnerability scanner. We have a way of detecting and enforcing on changes with the networking configuration of an instance. We've got a full SCAP compliant scanner as well that's built into our vulnerability scanner that allows us to check for OS and application level drift. So to zoom that back out, you've got this system that has multiple security controls that are enforced via policy sitting in Fabric, doing everything that you just described, giving you a full event trail, and also giving you a very good sense of what your compliance posture is. And that's also another module in the system, taking all the security controls and the state of the workload and measuring it against something like a PCI or a HIPAA. So you nailed the problem space, and then we're really coming forward with a solution to address all of it.
And the company has 2 products. One is called Insight, and the other one's called Secure. And we just talked about most of the features of Secure, but what Insight does is essentially it creates the east-west net flows inside of each tenant and then bubbles those up into a workload-centric visualization. And so those Insight features are also included in Secure, but some organizations, and we're engaged with a Mirantis customer right now, that really is looking for visualization. I really want to know how my applications are talking. Most organizations are coming from a fairly flat internal network with security controls at the perimeter. And as they move to a DevOps orientation and use some of the capabilities inside of OpenStack, they try to figure out, well, if I want to put the perimeter security closer to that application, what are the rules that I should use? How do these applications behave? Well, traditionally, they don't know. And so there's an additional gap there.
I think Nick and I are going to want to drill as deeply as we can into the visualization aspect of this, visualization being a sort of a special interest of ours. I've seen static examples and animated examples of your visualization, although I haven't worked directly with it yet. But it looks like that you're using a very simple kind of articulated circle, and then describing east-west flows as lines connecting segments of that circle. Is that the basis of most of the visualization?
Can we maybe get a screenshot that we can edit into the video?
Yeah, I plan to. Yeah.
There we go.
It doesn't come across well in words, but it strikes me as a very elegant way of representing potentially very complex information in a spare, actionable way that can be drilled into fairly easily by people with mice and time on their hands to drill into it, right? This is a why is visualization so increasingly important? Yours is not the only product that is fooling around with visualization, and it seems to be a theme industry-wide, not always with security, but typically with networking.
I would say that there are a few things. I mean, network operators and network security operators have been able to get access to net flows and understand, in a very flat format, what the flows are that they're seeing. But other people, the application owners, business unit owners, et cetera, don't really have facility for that. And it's hard to parse out really what's information out of this just a tabular list of flows. So I think the visualization is part of a trend towards trying to provide more actionable intelligence, more actionable information to the people that own the systems, rather than saying it's there, but you got to go hunt for it.
And in terms of what are keeping security operators up at night, this is one of the first things we get when people move to any virtualized environment. Is I've gone from something that's very easy to measure. Right. I've got a tap out on a physical switch. I've got all those mechanisms set up, and now I've got these highly dynamic environments. Sometimes these are stamped out pods with overlapping IP pools in every measure, not just IP space, but MAC and potentially even other elements as well. And so our philosophy was, let's get a magnifying glass and a flashlight in on that black box and give you the information about how traffic is traveling, even on the same hypervisor within the same project / tenant, et cetera.
It's also from a company / product strategy perspective, a way to get people to use pieces of the product as they're kind of undergoing this journey. I think most people tend to see that the classic enterprise perimeter security model is not as effective, especially given some of the changes like OpenStack and some of the opportunities with SDN as well. However, making that wholesale change overnight is asking for a huge amount of commitment from an end user, and it's disruptive. So this gives them a way to kind of add on the pieces of the functionality as they journey towards that micro-segmentation, or at least a more flexible and dynamic security perimeter that takes into account that these workloads can be ephemeral. They can come up be online and then be end of life within an hour or minutes.
What is the architecture of the main product?
Yeah, I'll take it. So it's comprised of two components. Both of them are virtual machines. We're 100% software based. There's no cloud subscription that you need, and there's no hardware box that lives anywhere. And there's also no requirement for a presence in the workload, and that's something to really zoom in on. Some folks that have similar products will require you to actually put an agent within the OS. We sit on the hypervisor. We're another denizen of the hypervisor community, just like all the other virtual machines. So we have a virtual machine appliance that lives out on each hypervisor, and then we have another management virtual machine we call the control center that all those appliances report back into. So that's the deployment architecture at a high level.
So the VMA, you have a VMA running effectively on each hypervisor host?
Correct.
And how does that instrument the hypervisor from the point of view of a VM living in sort of the user space?
We interact with primarily three OpenStack API sets: Nova, Neutron, and Horizon. And so via Nova and some pieces of Horizon, we're getting machines coming in online, machine state, number of bit NICs, UUIDs, et cetera. And then through Neutron, we're really tapping the network configuration And so from that perspective, we're able to not only observe what's going across the wire and make a set of correlated assumptions around what a virtual machine is doing, but then we can actually tie that back to hypervisor inventory. And to the extent that those are the same all as well, to the extent that we see any drift there, it's something we need to take a look at.
Mm-hmm. And then it sounds as though operators can launch machines with particular descriptions that automate their inclusion in various segments. And I mean that implementing this policy from the point of view of operations is fairly simple. It can be done, at several different levels, including programmatically. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we've been driven in kind of the enterprise readiness by a very large telco/carrier, and so they really need everything to operate in an automated fashion. And so it's not a question of whether we thought it was a good idea. It was actually kind of pre-season requirements. Yeah. And our aggregation of assets, we refer to as trust zones, and we'll see that. And those may kind of line up exactly with tenant/project, but they don't have to. In other words, we can get more fine-grained. Say tenant might belong to, be equated for a given organization with an application, but in terms of trying to provide this visibility, they may want to slice into the tiers of that application, geographic areas, et cetera. And so the trust zone membership doesn't have to tie directly to tenant because each asset can belong to more than one trust zone for the purposes of reporting as well as controls.
Interesting. And I would imagine that this can become quite complex if you decide that you want to implement geographically limited trust zones in order to limit the ability of a subverted application, for example, to proxy communications into the rest of your cloud and mess you up in ways beyond its brief. That's pretty fascinating. What is the actual experience of implementing policy in a VM start, for example? What does that look like? I mean, I assume it. You can do it with Python, you can do it with APIs, you can do it with REST, you can do it all different ways. How do you define How do you define and how do you authenticate the VM start to include a VM in a particular trust zone, like a simplest case?
There are a number of mechanisms which you alluded to. So we've got an authenticated API that can be used to assign or reassign membership. It can be done via Power CLI, Python, Puppet, Chef, Ansible type scripting at inception. It can be done through the UI. We've got some mechanisms, including string matching, that'll populate based on the name of the VM, where it belongs, in a few different ways.
So this can be done very simply. I mean, like really, really simply. Dead simply.
Yeah.
Depending on.
We always get asked, kind of how can we make it more complex and fine-grained, but I think you're right on it. I mean, the whole idea is that start simple and then go ahead and add some refinements and some enhancements to it. We really encourage people to make this simple, even if they're only starting at BU and application sorts of boundaries. It's an improvement from where they are, and it's something that people can digest.
Now, your basic set of policies, as I understand it, says that the first thing that anyone does in setting up Catbird is to define what a default workload has access to. And then any workload, that launches subsequently, if it's not made a member of another group of policies, will adopt the default security. So there's no way to there's no way to have a workload that slips through the cracks. There's no way to have a workload, without a great deal of contrivance. You can't shoot yourself in the foot. You can't accidentally start an untrusted workload in a trusted pool without, really passing through a lot of firewalls and intending to do it and saying yes, to a lot of, this is a very risky thing to do prompts and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a zone actually that's called untrusted, and that is the catch-all bucket, if you will. So rogue, unanticipated workloads that don't match any exterior or interior automation criteria will be caught there. And one of the use cases for that, we actually call it the penalty box sometimes. You put a bidirectional default deny-all rule on that zone. So it actually needs to be staged in a production zone before it can operate on the network.
So let me ask this question. So when you were setting up a kind of default rule for for the zones, or when you're setting up a default rule that you want non-customized workloads to run in, what are the kinds of things that people should be thinking about and setting up?
A whole host of things, right? And it might not just be in terms of where that workload can have access to. That's certainly one consideration. But you have to ask yourself the question, if you feel comfortable that you've taken into account most of the cases on where a workload should go when it comes online, should that thing have access at all? Maybe it has very limited access. Maybe it only has access to the part of the network where your vulnerability scanner is or something like that. So if you wanted to have some sort of access, what kind of limited access do you want to give it? So that's thing number one. But you may want to do other things too. You may want to have an aggressive intrusion detection policy assigned to that zone too. So it's looking for a wider set of intrusion detection prevention rules, even potentially knowing that workload, just by virtue that it made its way into that untrusted zone, has a higher risk profile. You may want to launch a very aggressive vulnerability scan against those workloads too as they come online. Again, same higher risk profile. So there's a whole host of things you can do beyond network access to lower your risk as an organization by upping the game on the security controls that are applied to that zone, if you will.
Yeah, we've got, if we think about some of the functionality of Insight, this is designed by intent, is, you can look at that workload wherever it's sitting today, right? If that's on VMware, that's fine. And say, where is it talking to and from? Now, even without applying any judgment to it, we say this is permitted and okay today. At a minimum, when that gets put into OpenStack, when we create some rules around the security groups, it shouldn't be any more permissive than what that baseline behavior is, and arguably should be a little less permissive. So that's a step that people can take to move that fence tighter towards the actual workload that it is today, and be able to catch any behavior that drifts from that.
Thank you.
You mentioned VMware. You work across multiple infrastructure as a service fabrics.
Correct, specifically VMware and OpenStack right now. And at the top, when I said hybrid IT infrastructure, that's really what we mean today. It's those two platforms. We've got a few other ones in the works right now. But taking that same approach, taking that hypervisor or cloud platform integrated approach, using APIs, as our foundation for those integrations, not requiring an agent, and being able to craft and apply security policy, and do visualization in a very normalized way. You've got this single console, you've got this entity called a trust zone, and it doesn't matter the workload type. You're going to have this very familiar and easy way to define and apply security policy and measure events and finally compliance.
Are there particular challenges in a hybrid environment?
Yeah, absolutely, and I would use the word normalization, right? And I'll give you just one quick example. VMware, for instance, really has no notion of tenancy, right? And so when you're spanning these two environments and you're pulling in workloads from an environment like OpenStack that does have a heavy notion of tenancy, right? You have to, introduce some of those concepts without the user being exposed to them under the covers. For instance. So yeah, absolutely. There is a whole host of complicated things going on behind the scenes to, make an inventory item look like a simple inventory item. I've got an asset, I've got a collection of interfaces, I've got a layer 2, layer 3 mapping, right. But there's a whole lot of things that our API connectors are doing behind the scenes to make that experience be seamless.
Gotcha.
Have you experimented, and when you talk about VMware, you're talking about native VMware running independently, fundamentally, except for networking connections, potentially with an OpenStack. Have you fooled around with the VMware integrated OpenStack, either on the VMware side or in an instantiation like, for example, Mirantis, VMware via Nova and ESXi and so on?
I think the VIO.
Yeah, we've done a bit. Notionally, it doesn't change much for us since we're still leveraging the same APIs for the information. It behaves largely the same. The uniqueness ends up being on what mechanism is used for provisioning. You've got the VMware operators who have a set of tools they're really comfortable with, and you've got the more DevOps-centric OpenStack guys. And so there can be some nuance in that.
Okay.
So do you anticipate working with public clouds as well at any point? I mean, is it possible for you to impose your form of security on public cloud workloads as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry for the hand gestures there. I keep getting screen pop-ups. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. In terms of public cloud, it's an absolute must. Our vision as a company is to be able to cover any workload on any platform. So that's going to include public cloud platforms, containers, even bare metal. Right. We've got roadmap plans for all of that stuff. But you can imagine public cloud is one of the number one things we get asked for. And so it's definitely something on our roadmap.
Certainly it's something that a lot of OpenStack users are also using. These days, more the norm than the exception, that people are working with multiple, public as well as a private OpenStack. Yep. What about adapting to the wide variety of SDN solutions that are now coming available for OpenStack? Since you go through Neutron, is there a distinct preference? Does one need to be concerned that Catbird will not work, for example, with certain SDN fabrics as opposed to others?
Yeah, I was gonna do that. Yeah, so there's some videos on our website, so I'm not breaching any confidentiality here, but we're doing some work with Hewlett Packard Enterprise right now with their HPE SDN band controller right now, and this is actually one of our initial steps into the bare metal physical workload realm. And the idea there is we can leverage the SDN controller and its command over the switches it's managing to not only give us visibility on the net flows between two physical entities, but also give us the ability to do certain types of enforcement. So just using an example, we have a notion in our product called zone access control lists, right? And typically that's to prevent communication between two virtual instances. Well, with the SDN controller, we can actually look for traffic that violates those rule sets and use its ability to tear down sessions to enforce a boundary around two bare metal workloads. So the SDN controller work, I think, is absolutely huge for us. It allows us to maintain an agentless approach to how we measure and enforce security policies out on the physical wire.
And also, companies who are looking to embrace that are typically more the fit for the way we think in terms of security and approaching, marrying security and operations up. So it's kind of, done in one step, although they're independent controls. So we really love the trend, really do.
Well, that's good. It's obviously very reassuring, since so many OpenStack implementations now, particularly as they move to scale, are going to incorporate, some best of breed, SDN solution. To think that you're actually anticipating this and looking to leverage the special features of the product is pretty cool. What kinds? It strikes me that as you work to automate and simplify the imposition of security policy in an increasingly complex space, including dynamic workloads and things that happen really too fast for human beings to monitor and manage in any real connected sense. They can only do so via various levels of simplification and proxying and visualization. How are you working to make intervention in case of security issues easier? It seems to me that there must be a pretty powerful story here around Catbird, making it easier to black hole a DDoS attack. I don't know. I'm not a security expert, and so inevitably what I say is going to end up sounding very naive and kind of like, wow, movie-like.
Yeah.
What kinds of security threats are people actually facing these days, and how is intervention facilitated by using Catbird?
So we sit inside that virtualized fabric. So we don't. And if you think about the whole steps of the kill chain, we don't have purview over all of those. I would say one of the core areas where we can help, and I'll give an example of where we're doing this. We have a lot of correlated data about how VMs behave. And with the grouping of those VMs, and there's the ability to say these things do these things at this volume with this level of occurrence on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Now, if something in there changes, especially if one of those machines starts behaving differently than its peers inside that trust zone, that group, we're in a good position to be able to surface that information. So one use case with a very large organization is being able to we feed our information on a southbound basis as well, both from forwarding those unique net flows that we gather, as well as security events to threat management systems, et cetera. They in turn are able to go and see a pattern, whether where the origin of that pattern or another system is, and say, I want to insert a custom IDS rule into all of these Catbird control centers to see where this behavior is occurring elsewhere inside the environment. And that's a good way to really start to put a perimeter around the lateral spread of some sort of aberrant behavior. And again, it goes with that correlated perspective of inventory versus network behavior and being able to have access to the controls. That's one example. So think about the fact that with all the kits out there available, organizations will be breached. It's just a fact. But how can you minimize the impact and put a fence around that? I think that's a very real use case we can help with. It's not the only one out there that's important to organizations. I'd be rushed to add, but it's real.
Are you using any machine learning techniques at all?
We're investing pretty heavily in some of that capability right now. So we won't talk about too much, but you're right on the money in terms of saying that. It's one thing to say let a human see all these different behaviors that are drifting from a baseline. It's another one to say, based on some statistical analysis, et cetera, as well as emerging threat feeds, et cetera. These are really important, right? So 100 may happen a day, but here are the 3 or 4 that somebody really, really ought to take a look at.
Gotcha. Thank you. So what do you think is the most important thing that needs to be worked on in the next, say, 12 to 18 months?
I can give my opinion. Couple things, sort of related. We really feel like production needs to be moved closer to the workload. There's very coarse-grained sets of security policies being enforced in very expensive and effective boxes out on the perimeter. But as we move into this dynamic world that what we're really in right now, right? We talked about things like having pods with overlapping IP pools and things like this. Trying to take something that's sitting way outside of that environment and trying to enforce control over it is simply ineffective. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges is how do you not try to re-represent that world that's been crafted out in the physical world for physical devices, but translate that into something that's been custom tailored for these dynamic workloads. And then for the security controls that are being applied, how can they become more intelligent? How can your control landscape learn from each other? Right now, most of these controls, even in a next-gen firewall product, are still kind of treated as disparate services. So, how can a vulnerability result impact the state of an intrusion control? Or how can some network traffic maybe impact the state of a firewall control, right? All these things humming along and working together, woven within the fabric, and then leveraging, as you pointed out, deep machine learning, statistically defined baselines to know what's normal and being able to react in certain situations automatically without requiring an operator. That's my long-winded answer to your question. I'll let Chris go too. He may have a different opinion.
No, I think he's right on it, because I think what we're seeing operators ask for is help me get the job done faster with fewer people. And so, how do you do this? Well, you leverage the resources they have already, and you have to provide some benefit to not only having that information, that data, but creating something that's actionable out of that and surfacing that for an operator, and even offering them a recommendation for remediation. We don't think that we're going to go jump right to the ghost in the machine behavior right away, but at least saying, hey, we really recommend that, for example, you're seeing this, you increase the granularity of your scans, IDS, firewall rules, et cetera. That's pretty important. And alongside of that, we alluded to earlier, is that as we show our capabilities both for Insight and Secure, people are saying, that's fine. So you've got VMware and you've got OpenStack, but I want to see this across the enterprise. I think people they get interested in point solutions, but they want something that's comprehensive. And we'll rush to add to that we want to have the capability to be that one lens across the organization. We think realistically, though, we're going to be a key component in feeding up to those lenses, because obviously, whether you want to look at Cisco or Juniper, other operators out there, VMware, they all have that ambition. HP does as well. And so we've got to be able to offer a compelling user experience and also be able to offer that same level of actionable information in other people's consoles.
Excellent. John, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on?
No, I don't think so. I would like to pause for a second and look at the visualization of Insight. And what I'm doing here is clicking on the diagram, which you folks know and have played with because you designed it and so on.
Pretty familiar with.
And I'm hovering my cursor over it, and this is the diagram that says 1, 2, 3. Can you comment a little bit on the diagram, the animated diagram that says 1, 2, 3, which will be floating over your face when I finish editing this thing together?
Actually, you should keep that the whole time as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what we're looking at here is really a topological view on east-west data flows within your data center, expressed through our trust zone, our grouping constructs. Think of it as microsegmentation, right? So whether that's at the tenant project level, or as Chris pointed out earlier, you may have a tenant or project that has multiple applications with multiple tiers within that tenant, multiple user groups, multiple different shared data center services that you might need to treat uniquely, both from a traffic analysis perspective and also how you apply security policy to them. So we're representing all that in a single lens. We give you the ability to drill down into each one of those zones, because you may want to get as granular as a virtual machine or an instance residing within the zone, so you can expand them. You can run reports on them, a bunch of different reports to get an idea of, for instance, the ingress and egress traffic coming out. What are those unique port and protocol pairs traversing in and out of the zones? Give you an idea of maybe how you want to initially craft your firewall rules or tune them up as you go. And also correlated with the flow data that you're looking at, we also have the ability to represent things like firewall allows and blocks, and also intrusion detection and prevention events. So these are now security events correlated with flow, giving you a sense of those security controls in motion, if you will. And we're going to be doing a lot of building on top of that as well, but this is kind of foundational to that. So this is that real simplistic view of understanding that east-west data flow, all leveraging data that we're gathering from within the virtual fabric.
Yeah, and the way the UI works is across the bottom half, you're essentially seeing the grouped assets, and across the top half, you're seeing the destination or source of traffic to those grouped assets. And you can drill down, as Holland said, to the asset, and if you want to go old school, you can click through line or via endpoint and actually see a tabular list of net flows.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So if you could do anything with a visualization tool, how would you do it?
Clarify for me, Nick. What do you mean by you give me a ballpark?
I have an ulterior motive in asking, of course, which John has anticipated. So John and I are both kind of on this visualization kick right now, because we are building a visualization tool for OpenStack things for the summit. So if anybody's going to the summit, come to our session. We'll add a link to it. But anyway, so what I'm asking is basically there's a certain kind of limitation to visualizing conceptual data that may have more than just 2 or even 3 dimensions in what is essentially a 2-dimensional space, even if we're emulated as a 3-dimensional space or whatever. So if you could design the ultimate visualization environment, what would it look like?
Wow. No one's ever asked that before.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I got one nobody's ever asked! All right!
out of my Mac now.
I think the biggest, where I would start is that there are many different consumers of the information, and so depending on the use case, it's a matter of perspective, right? So if I'm a network security operator, I'm going to want to look at it from that same perspective that I'm used to with my other tools. If I'm an application owner, I probably like the way Catbird's doing it today because it's workload centric. I may want to look at that from what's hitting just external IPs versus what's hitting internal IPs. May want to, I may be concerned about capacity and services, so I maybe want to look at it from a segment basis. I'd love to be able to create visualization that lets you kind of start from a default perspective and then switch your perspective and apply some criteria to that.
Maybe role-based, and I'll take that even a step further. I have a few different categories running around in my head, but we'll start kind of in three. I've got, what do I know about the hypervisor? What do I know at the network level? And then what do I know at the security level? And being able to elegantly weave in those three different areas of domain expertise and have that operator be able to come in and get a very network-centric view, get a very, hypervisor-centric, cloud platform-centric view, right? And then finally that security piece. I think that's the end state, and it'll probably end up looking something like a Minority Report screen that you're going to need both your hands for and some sort of translucent canvas. But yeah, I really think that's the holy grail, and that's certainly all the feedback that we gather from partners, customers, prospects. Everything kind of falls into one or all three of those buckets.
I think that we're sort of coming down to the same kind of realization, is that you have visualizations of state, and they can overlap, with even simple contrivances like color coding to segregate information while allowing the display of multiple layers of information. But then you have the dimension of time and change that you have to encode as well. And somehow, you need to see them all together. And so what we're wrestling with is manipulative metaphors for pushing a visualization backwards and forwards through time so that you can see critical change. It's going to be interesting to bump up against the limitations of several generations of graphic tools on the web and elsewhere, as we pound our heads on the desk and try to make things work.
Which is a lot for us to think about on a Monday. But.
Yeah. We've been asked for one particular use case that speaks to that, and that is being able to do a forensic rewind on the flow data to say,
wow.
something interesting happened. So let's wind this back to that point in time and see exactly what happened. And another piece to add to that one of the security guys I respect the most talks about is the perspective of security topology, right? So where you're seeing the flows from one side or the other has to take into account what kind of filters or controls are put in before and after it, because you could have a perspective that's valid, but if you don't take into account the controls that precede and follow that perspective, you could have a missed opportunity there, whether something got through or whether something was actually dropped properly.
Is forensically relevant as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and control state at the time that you're doing a rewind in a forensic situation is hugely important, right? So just to use an example, if I don't know the state of a virtual machine and its interfaces a week ago when I'm looking at the NetFlow data, well, there could be a context change there. I could have switched to a different port group. I could have, set up a situation where I'm connecting to a couple of different logical networks simultaneously, and now I'm doing some routing or something like that. So knowing at the time that I saw this flow, that state of the machine that I'm curious about becomes hugely relevant.
Or whether it was even there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right.
Excellent. So unfortunately, I think we are coming to the end of our time because I'm really enjoying this, and I would just go on and on and on, and then John's head would explode, and that would not be pretty. So I'm going to ask one question that I'm going to try and remember to start asking at the end of every podcast. So John, try and remember to remind me if I forget. I've stolen this from somebody else, and I've forgotten whom I've stolen it from, so next time I'll have to give them credit. But who do you name two people that you would think that we should get on this podcast?
Interesting. Ooh, you're allowed to name me. Yeah, I've got my first name.
Go ahead, I'll throw one out too.
Okay. Oh man, no, I want you to go first.
Yeah, so you guys might see him as part of the evil empire, but from a security perspective, I think that Dennis Moreau from VMware would be an excellent person to have on.
Okay. Because?
It's just way smarter than we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to talk about the kind of problems and trends, he's got a practical as well as an academic grasp on, the state of play, and very engaging. But it's certainly one where I have to have a Red Bull or two before I sit down with him because I can't keep up.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you
All
for
right.
that.
Yes, definitely. All right, so we won't schedule him for a Monday morning.
I got
Holland?
No, go.
I would say that another guy he's got a different perspective, but very, very astute and capable at the security level would be Ed Amoroso, who just retired as CSO of AT&T.
Yeah, sure.
Got a very, great engaging manner. He'll give a perspective of how the vendors are to work with and how interested they are in solving the problems that security guys see as being important, but may be a cannibalistic impact on that particular provider's business model and how they're addressing it.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay.
Good ideas.
Yeah,
Yes.
This is proof positive that Chris and I hang out too much because those are the two that I had in my head. I'm not kidding.
Well, I did only ask for two, so.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's good. We're going to need a little brocation here, I think.
That's right. Separation.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent.
So
Well-
thank you both very much. I'm really looking forward to seeing the validation come through, and when it does, folks will be able to get the software and install it on Rantis OpenStack and begin experiencing this new way of handling security for themselves.
You guys make it so easy to work with you.
Yeah.
We really appreciate the support, engagement, and love working with the software. We've worked with various different distros, and you guys by far have it the best.
Hands
How
down.
kind of you to say.
Well done.
Definitely. Well, you'll get your money later. All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank the two of you and also John. Thank you all. And thank you for joining us today and join us next time for OpenStack Unlocked.
You need any help with those chicks in the tub, just let us know.
Let us know.
Yeah, really.